Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome to our webinar. We are going to hold off getting started for just another minute or two. We've got people that are rolling in, getting logged in here to the GoToWebinar. So appreciate your patience. We'll be getting started in just a few minutes. Looks like we got quite a few people coming in. That's great. Again, welcome to our webinar today. We're holding off for just another minute or two so we can allow people to finish getting logged into the webinar. We appreciate your patience. Just hang on, we'll be getting started in just another minute. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. We are talking about navigating the upcoming postal increases that are scheduled for July. My name is Monica Lundquist. I'm the Postal Operations Director here at LSC Communications, and also with us today is Chris Brown, who is our Vice President of our Co-Services. Also helping us in the background is Megan, who is with our Marketing Department. Again, thanks everybody for your attendance today. We really appreciate you spending some time with us today. Hopefully we'll be able to give you some great information. Let's go through just a few housekeeping items. The first item is when you first log in to GoToWebinar, it automatically puts you into a mute mode, and that's just to help keep any background noise to a minimum. Also, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions a little bit later on in the webinar. There's two ways for you to submit your question. You can either type your question into the questions area that's located on the GoToWebinar console on your screen, and then we'll read and respond to your questions. Or if you'd like to ask your question out loud, you can click on the raise hand icon, and then we'll unmute you during the Q&A session so that you can ask your question. Also want to let you know that these slides are available for you to download. They're available right here on the GoToWebinar console. There's a line in your console called Handouts, and if you click on that, you should be able to download that PDF of the slides. And if you have any problems with that, you can let us know after the webinar. We'll be happy to help you. Also want to let you know that we are recording this webinar for future purposes. So just so that you know, we are recording this information. And we also would appreciate it if after the webinar, you will receive a follow-up email if you would please submit that survey. That helps us to improve our content for future webinars. We appreciate your cooperation with that. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Got a lot to cover today. We're going to talk about the postal filing with the Postal Service filed with the Postal Regulatory Commission. We're going to talk about the status and the timeline of that. Then we'll give you some overall information, some high-level view of the proposed price increases. And then we're going to break it out by class and by shape or processing category. We've also put together some examples of the actual postage increase as it would affect some specific mailings that are produced here at LSC for our clients. We've just taken a cross-section of different types of mailing to give you some live world examples. And then we'll talk about some of the opportunities. Obviously, when we talk about postal price increases, it's never a fun topic to talk about, but it is necessary and it's important information for us to share. And even though it does deal with postal increases, there are some opportunities that you can take advantage to help try to mitigate some of this increase. And then we'll go through the next steps. and their LSC contacts, and we'll also have an opportunity to ask questions. So let's start it out with a timeline. As you're probably aware, on April 6th, the Postal Service filed their proposed prices with the Postal Regulatory Commission, also known as the PRC. And that was done on April 6th to allow for the 90-day advance notification that's required. Now, once that filing takes place, those price files then are published by the Postal Service on the Postal Explorer website. Now, you can look at the actual Postal Regulatory Commission filing to get that information, but a lot of times these price files that are published on Postal Explorer are a little bit easier to read, a little bit easier to understand. So with that price filing, there's also a comment period. So there's a comment period where comments can be made to the Postal Regulatory Commission, and those comments are open until May 6th. Now the comment period, anybody's allowed to comment or post those comments to the Postal Regulatory Commission, but typically what they're asking for there is if there's any objection to the legality of any of the things that have been filed. So that remains open until May 6th. Then at that point, there's a 21-day requirement that the Postal Service, or the Postal Regulatory Commission has to review the pricing proposal and determine compliance. Now, in the past, it's been pretty typical for the PRC to go ahead and approve the rates as they're proposed. They can have and do have the right to remand the case back to the Postal Service and request changes to those or request additional documentation, things of that nature. But that's atypical. That doesn't usually happen. Usually they kind of just give a red stamp to it and go ahead and approve it. So we anticipate that to happen. And then with the mandatory required timeline there for implementation, that would make the implementation date then July 10th of this year. And again, so the proposals are just proposals at this time, and once those have been approved by the Postal Regulatory Commission, they would then be implemented on July 10th. The only time that that date would change would be if the PRC would remand something back to the Postal Service and they needed time to provide additional information back to the PRC or needed to change something that might push that date back. But again, that's very unusual for that to happen. So when the Postal Service files this proposal, they have a certain amount of what's called their price authority that they can use. And the Postal Service proposal that they filed on April 6th used almost that full authority. And when we talk about the price authority, there's really different categories that we're talking about here. And this chart illustrates by class of mail. You'll see that listed here down on the left-hand side. And then across the top are the different price authorities categories. The first one is the CPI, or the Consumer Price Index. So that's kind of an inflationary based category that is based on the CPI. So that is dictated by whatever the Consumer Price Index is at the time of the filing. There's also a density category of their price authority. That has to do with the number of increased delivery points that are added every year with construction of housing and businesses and things of that nature. The amount of delivery points increases, but the level of mail or the volume of mail drops every year. So it becomes more costly to deliver mail to every delivery point. There's also a price category called retirement, and that is based on the pre-funding requirement that was in existence up until the Postal Reform Act that was signed, ironically, on the same day, on April 6th. And that retirement pre-funding now is no longer a requirement, but because this was all in play at the time that the filing was made, that retirement portion still exists. It was lowered by a little bit, but it still exists for this particular rate case. Then there's what we have what we call the non-compensatory pricing authority, and that is for any classes of mail or categories of mail that are not covering their costs. And those categories of mail You can see here listed as periodicals and package services. They can have up to a 2% additional increase to make up for that loss of cost coverage. Now, there are some categories within other classes of mail. So, for example, in marketing mail, there are some categories that are considered non-compensatory, so they may also see a little higher increase. Then we have what's called the bank. That's whatever is left over in their overall price authority that they didn't use in a previous rate case. Now, last August, when they implemented the last increase, they used almost all of their price authority that time as well, so there's very little left in the bank. So when you add all of those up, that is what comprises the total cap that they have to spend or increase for each of the classes of mail. So this is what ends up to be the average percent increase for each class of mail. Now, it's important to note that these are the overall price ranges. The average percent increases from 6.5% to 8.5%. However, individual price categories or rate cells within each of those classes may see increases higher than this or lower than this. And the reason for that is anytime they make any kind of adjustment in any rate cell that's either above or below that cap, then they've got to make the equivalent adjustment the other way in another price category or rate cell. So you will see some fluctuations, and we'll show you that in some of the rate charts that we have and in some of the examples that we've put together for you. Okay, now I'm going to turn it over to Chris, and Chris is going to give us a quick overview of the marketing mail.
Great, thank you, Monica. Thanks everyone for joining. I want to spend a little time going over the individual rate cells. As Monica pointed out, the averages are just that. They're an average. The detail is actually displayed in these rate cells. And we're going to use this similar format on several pages. So I just want to familiarize everyone with what we're really demonstrating here. So we used marketing mail for profit in this example, piece rate, auto, SCF. So that is the category of mail we're talking about. Down the left margin, we have the pre-sort categories sorted least expensive at the top, most expensive at the bottom. And again, we'll use this format on several slides. So just want everybody to get familiar with the layout. And then we've listed the rates for August of 2021, the proposed rates for July of 2022, the change in dollars, and then the change in percentages. So as Monica pointed out earlier, the averages can be misleading. And if you look at carrier route basic mail, you can see the current rate is 0.297. The proposed rate is 0.323. So we're going to see an overall increase of 8.75%. That category represents a significant portion of the mail in the industry. You can see high density, same kind of strategy here, 24.3 today. The new rate is 25.9. So it's about a 1.6 cent increase or 6.58%. What's interesting is the new categories at the top. So the post office has introduced two new price categories, and that's saturation prepared for a 5-digit pallet and high density plus bundles prepared for a 5-digit pallet. 5-digit pallets were added last year for the high density and carrier route. What that requires is not only organizing the bundle to a saturation or a high density plus requirement, but it also requires those bundles to be organized on a pallet that services a 5-digit zip code. So that supports the post office not needing to reprocess that pallet. It's ready to go straight into the postal facility, whether it's delivered directly to the DDU or supported through cross-docking at the SCF. Either way, the mail is already prepared. No reason to resort that pallet. So this gives you a general overview of the marketing mail flat rates. Monica, go to the next slide, please. So same chart, but now we're talking about marketing mail nonprofit rates. So you can see those new categories were introduced. The order is a little bit different here because, again, we've sorted these least expensive at the top, most expensive at the bottom. We still have the new saturation 5-digit and the new HD plus 5-digit, but again, a little different order. You can see if we look at carrier route, again, where a majority of the market mails, today you're paying 20 cents, 209. Under the new rates, you would pay 232. So that's a 3-cent per copy increase, which is 16.6%. So that is a significant increase for that rate category. So in all cases, you know, the more refined you can pre-sort your mail and prepare it for the post office, the less expensive the rate. Let's go to the next slide, Monica. So again, similar chart, but now we're looking at marketing mail letters. The majority of marketing mail letters is going to mail at 5-digit rate. So that rate is going from 25 cents to 26.6. So that's about a 6.4% increase. We added marketing mail letter nonprofit rates. Again, you can see that is similar rate increase, little, not quite as expensive on the percentage for 5-digit mail, but still a 4.2% increase if you're mailing 5-digit marketing mail letter nonprofit. Next slide. So within the marketing mail letter rate, there are opportunities. So you can see that the discounts for drop shipping has improved in both categories. And then that's for profit and nonprofit. So you can see there are some opportunities to prepare the mail more efficiently. Next slide. So we always like to talk about the reason that pre-sorting is a good idea, a requirement in the industry actually, and that's the work sharing discount. So the value, again, same chart, but a little different calculation here. We've listed, again, least expensive at the top, most expensive at the bottom, the August 2021 rates, and then the calculated work sharing discount. So the way to understand this chart is if you start at the bottom, an ADC is 68 cents a piece, but if you can convert an ADC bundle to a 3-digit bundle, there's a price discount of $119 per thousand. So that's the way to read this chart. So that conversion for the current rates is worth $119. Under the new rates in July, that conversion is worth $116 in postal discount. So you can follow the chart up. The conversion from 5-digit to carrier route, again, it got more valuable. It's now 9.4 cents. I mean, 9.4%, excuse me, $116 versus $106 in last year. So it gives you an idea of the value of co-mail, the value of converting your mail to from 5-digit to carrier route. If you convert up into the high density categories, it even presents more opportunities. So next chart, please, Monica. So when we look at the high density rates, they did experience a slight increase. It's less significant than carrier route, but it is still an increase. But the work sharing discounts are certainly worth pursuing, especially when we look at those high density plus on the 5-digit pallet and the saturation on a 5-digit pallet. So high density plus 5-digit pallet basically creates a discount of 0.131. And the saturation is a discount of 0.145. That's per piece. So as those rates go into effect, preparing mail to those categories will present an opportunity. So back to you, Monica.
All right, thank you, Chris. That's a great explanation. So now let's move on to periodical rates. These are the regular rates. And again, because it's a little hard to look at the entire rate chart and still be able to see anything, what we've done is, as we did before, we take a little cross section. This happens to be the regular rates instead of nonprofit. This happens to be the piece rate at an automation pre-sort level and drop ship to the SCF. Again, we list the prices from the least expensive to the most expensive. These are the prices from as they currently are from last August, and these are the proposed prices for July. And here's the dollar change and the percent change. And you can see here that they are excuse me, increasing the less fine levels of pre-sort by a greater percentage than they are the lower levels of pre-sort. So again, some definite opportunities to do some optimization to your mail there through some kind of co-mailing or cooperative type of mailing situation. Now with periodicals, in addition to the piece rates, there's also a per pound rate. And in periodicals, this is also influenced by the amount of advertising. So again, we've listed this from least expensive to most expensive. So if you're drop shipping to a destination delivery unit, that's the least expensive, followed by the SCF and an ADC. And then there's zones from zones 1 and 2 to zone 9. And you'll see here there's a different rate for advertising. So the advertising content receives a different rate than the editorial. And you'll see that the editorial rate is less than the advertising rate. Now, so these are the August rates, the current rates, and then these are the proposed rates. And you'll see the dollar change and the for both advertising and editorial and the percent change. So you'll see here in the advertising area, they didn't increase those rates by much at all. But look at this, they changed the editorial rates by quite a bit, especially in the farther zones. And as you'll remember from last year, in August, what they also did was they changed this pricing structure a little bit. Prior to last August, these rates for advertising pound were incrementally more expensive the farther the distance was. And the higher the zone. And that wasn't the case with editorial, those were flat. Well, what they did last year was flatten the advertising as well. So what that resulted in was a diminished, not eliminated, but it diminished some of the drop shipping benefits. So what you'll want to take a look at here for this year is the increase in the editorial. That's received a much higher increase than the advertising content. So what you'll want to do is take a look at your particular periodicals and maybe do some what-if analysis using different ad percentages to see what kind of change that makes. Now we're going to move on to bound printed matter, and this happens to be flat. And there's the non-pre-sorted, which is less typical. Most commercial clients are going to be mailing at these pre-sorted rates, but we do have some clients that mail at the non-pre-sorted rates, and you'll see pretty much overall in the non-pre-sorted, it's about a 4.5 or a little bit less increase. Now in the pre-sort category, there's a per piece and a per pound charge also in bound printed matter for these flats, and it's based on zone. And you'll see that the carrier route received a 7.14% increase, the pre-sort 6.32, and nothing in the per pound category. Now let's take a look at the bound printed matter parcels, because it's a little bit different picture here. Again, we've got the non-pre-sorted, which is less typical, and the pre-sorted, which is more typical. But in the non-pre-sorted, you'll see what they did was you've got double-digit increases here in the lower weights and the lower zones. But then when you start getting into the higher zones and the higher weights, you've actually got price decreases. So very interesting approach that they've taken here, very different than what we've seen in the past. And then if you look at the pre-sorted part, again, carrier route pre-sort receiving about 11.1 increase, regular pre-sort about 10%, and the per pound rate kind of all over the place. You've got big increases in the local zones or closest zones, and you've actually got decreases, big ones, in the per pound rates for the further zone. So if you mail at bound printed matter parcels, you're definitely going to want to do some analysis. Take a look at what you're doing for your parcels, the way that you're packaging those things, and the weights that you're using. You may want to change some of that up depending on what your results are. We also want to take a look at first class. Of course, the retail stamp is going from 58 cents to 60 cents, so it's a 3.4% increase. We do have some clients that do mail some first class, um, especially flats, and so we've got this chart here shows you the more pre-sorted, which is more typical. And what you're seeing here is double-digit increases for weights that are higher than 3 ounces. And you'll see here, if you are looking at the letter size, those increases are about 6.5, 6.8, right in that category. We also want to mention that there's also other things that are included here, such as the full service intelligent mail discount, that remains the same. Nothing has changed there for any of the classes of mail. The seamless incentive also remains the same. They did do some increases to the permit fee. So if you're applying for a new permit, that will cost you slightly more. Or if you are applying for a periodicals authorization for one of your publications, that's also going to cost you a little bit more. The promotions will remain as they are. Those are not impacted by this rate filing. The promotions are based on a calendar year, so that's why those have not changed. But we do want to point this out because it's important. Last year in August, they did increase some of the promotion levels here. So you'll see that what used to be a 2% discount on your postage increased on some of these promotions to 3 and even 4%. They also increased some of the time frames for some of these promotions. So if you're not currently taking advantage of these promotions and you have eligible mail that can participate, we definitely encourage you to take a look at that to make sure that you're helping to mitigate some of your increases by taking advantage of these promotions. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at some actual examples. These are actual live mailings that we pulled. We tried to take a cross section, a little bit of everything here. And the first one we're going to take a look at, these are actual LSC client mailings. This one is a marketing mail, regular rate. This happens to be a letter size piece, so it's fairly lightweight, a little over 1 million pieces here. And this was drop shipped from the plant, and there's no carry route or high density here. I think we mentioned that earlier in the letter rates. Most of the volume falls into the 5-digit category, and that's because the pricing that the Postal Service has put in place, the carry route is actually more expensive than a 5-digit sort, and high density is slightly more beneficial than 5-digit, but not by a significant amount. So that's why you'll see most letter marketing mail is going to fall into that 5-digit pre-sort category. But anyway, in this particular case, for this example, they're going to see about a 6.35% increase. Now let's take a look at another marketing mail. This is a regular rate, and this is a flat, also pretty lightweight. This is 483,252 pieces. This was part of a co-bind, so a cooperative binding process at LSC, and it also drop shipped. This one is going to see about an 8.66% increase. This one, another example, also regular rate, a flat. This is a little heavier, 0.6058 pounds, 28,242 pieces, and it drop shipped from the printing plant. This will see an increase of about 6.79%. Now here's a nonprofit marketing mail. This is a flat, about a half a pound, 100,000, a little over 100,000 pieces. This was part of a co-mail, and this did drop ship, and their increase is about 7.7%. So you can see these depart from the averages. So it's important to do these individual analysis to get a more accurate indicator of what these increases are going to do to your postage budget. So let's take a look at a few periodicals. This one happens to be a nonprofit flat, 0.22 pounds. This was a co-poly, part of our co-poly program. 45.8% ads, 260,632 copies. And this particular publication will see an increase of 11.68%. So you can see again that those averages can be a little deceptive. It's very important to do these individual analysis. Here is a regular rate, flat. This is a bit heavier. This has a very low ad percent content and 6,922 copies. Despite the low copy count, they were able to drop ship this to an SCF. Now you'll see this increase is a little over 14%. Remember, we talked earlier about the editorial receiving a higher increase than the advertising, and you can see that reflected in this particular example. Here's another periodical, regular rate flat, 0.375 pounds per piece, 52.2% ads. This is also part of CoMail with 75,234 copies, and their increase is significantly less, as you can see. We also want to give you an example of a first class flat. This was 8.2 ounces per piece, 3,672 pieces. This is going to see an increase of about 15%. So these are not pretty, as you can see. Now we're going to take a look at bound printed matter. We did both a flat and a parcel here. The first one here is a flat for 1.14 pounds per piece, 8,800 pieces that drop shipped. Their percent increase is about 4.25%. Parcel, on the other hand, this was quite a heavy piece, 12.5 pounds per piece, 5,100 pieces, also drop shipped. But look at the increase here. So you can see that they made quite a significant change on the parcel. So if you're mailing at bound printed matter parcels, you're definitely going to want to do some analysis to see if there's anything differently that you can do with your packaging, your sizing, anything in that realm that can help mitigate some of those increases. All right, so now that we've gone through some of the rate charts, we've given you some examples of what the increases are going to do to some actual mailings. What are the next steps? Well, first of all, it's important to remember that these are proposed increases. They still need to be approved by the PRC, the Postal Regulatory Commission. We expect that they'll go ahead and approve them the way they are. There's always a chance they could be changed, but that's pretty unlikely. So if they are approved, that implementation date for these increases will be July 10th of this year, which is not that far away. So you definitely want to be starting to work on those analysis. You want to work with your mailing industry associations, your other industry associations, and share those analysis results and make your voice heard. These are pretty difficult increases to bear. And although it may not change what's going to happen as far as implementing these price increases, it's very important that you do this analysis and share those results with your associations so they can get this information to the Postal Service on just how devastating these increases are to you and what they do to your business. Now, having said that, as we mentioned earlier, there are some opportunities. We talked about the dropship discounts. Those have been increased for marketing mail, both letters and flats. So that is helpful. And we also talked about some of the new container discounts for carrier out flats. Those were introduced last year, and those have been added now, the new high density and the new saturation. So those definitely make co-mailing much more attractive to get to those high density levels and on those 5-digit pallets. So what does this mean? Well, when you talk about these things and you look at the things that you might need to do to help mitigate these, flexibility is the key. You might need to look at some new formats, and it may be things that you were hesitant to look at in the past, but with the fact that you've got these huge increases that are coming right on the heels of the ones that we had last August, you may need to rethink some of those things and take a look at pretty much anything you need to look at, whether that be a format change. So for example, maybe your trim size is just slightly off enough so that you can't qualify or not eligible for a co-mail program. You might want to look at some changes there. You might need to look at your schedules. That's another barrier sometimes for co-mailing. So you want to take a look at pretty much anything that you can think of to increase any opportunity to do what we call co-optimization. So anything that you can do to refine those pre-sort levels and refine those dropship discounts, whether it's co-mailing, co-mingling, co-palletization, anything like that. You want to take a look at that, even if you haven't been able to do that in the past, or you've been able to do it in a limited basis. You want to take a look at anything that will allow you to try to take advantage of those opportunities. And we also want to just remind you about those promotions. Don't forget about those. They've increased those discounts. They did that last year, and they've extended some of those time frames. So if you haven't been able to take advantage of those in the past, take a look and see if you're eligible for any of those that will help you save a little bit of money. All right, at this point, we are going to open it up for questions. I'm sure you have some. That was a lot of material to throw at you. That's a lot to absorb, I know. So we're going to open it up for questions. Again, there's two ways for you to do that. You can either raise your hand by clicking on that raise hand icon, and that will cue us to unmute you so that you can ask your question. Or if you'd prefer not to ask your question out loud, you can type it into the questions area, and then we'll read and respond to your question. So go ahead and start those questions, and we'll go ahead and take a look and see what we got out here. Don't be shy. This is your opportunity to ask questions. And wow, it looks like we've got a lot here. Okay, this one's asking about the difference in marketing mail and second class. So marketing mail is what used to be called standard mail, also used to be known many years ago as bulk mail. So that's anything that is marketing driven, things like catalogs, directories, things of that nature. So second class is now termed periodicals. So if you're mailing your magazines as a periodical, that would be a periodical rate. If you have, and there's some magazines that don't qualify for periodicals, so you may have a magazine that mails at marketing rate, but primarily what you'll see at marketing rate are things that are marketing driven, whether that's a letter type piece or catalog. So hopefully that will answer that question. Let's see. Okay, so this has follow-up. Second class, yes, that's known as periodical now. Okay. All right, so here's a question. Workshare, so basically Workshare is commingled mail, correct? We would have to purchase equipment and software if we were to move forward with that, plus training. So is that the goal for LSC coming up? Workshare actually can be done in a number of ways, and Chris, you chime in with anything that I might be missing. Workshare can be done any number of ways. Just your pre-sort that you usually put your mailing list through is a form of Workshare, in that you're consolidating and you're arranging your mailing list, your names, by zip code into those bundles and into containers that are optimized to take advantage of those discounts. Now you can further that by doing cooperative type things like co-mingling, co-mailing, co-binding, co-palletization, those types of things.
So anytime we use the word co, it means cooperative mailing, which is essentially combining multiple clients' mail list to achieve those pre-sort discounts or the drop ship discounts. And in most cases, it's both. So it wouldn't be typical for a publisher or a mail content owner to purchase equipment to do this. The key is leverage your printer capabilities or your distribution capabilities to aggregate mail across multiple projects and mail as a group. The more you mail together, the more efficient it can be.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you, Chris. Okay, here's another question. What are bound printed matter parcels? Good question. Typically, what we find there is very large catalogs, directories, books,
Heavy,
bound printed, yeah,
yeah,
bound,
heavy pieces.
yes, heavy pieces. Bound printed matter it has to be comprised of at least 90% printed material. So it's just very large pieces that exceed. Typically, what will happen if you to go to from a flat to a parcel is usually if you exceed 3/4 of an inch in thickness is usually when that happens. So it's a very large, thick catalog or a directory. Um, some companies do like a product catalog, like they'll do it once a year, like a huge product listing or a parts list, things like that, that are very, very large. That's typically what you'll see in bound printed matter parcels.
Right.
All right, another one. After this July increase, are there also postal increases scheduled for January 2023? Yes, unfortunately, the Postal Service has stated that they're going to go to twice a year increases starting in 2023, and those will be in January and July. The January increase will be limited to the consumer price index, so that'll be inflationary based. And then the July increase will be any of the other price authority categories that we talked about earlier. Now, the Postmaster General has indicated that they're going to look at not implementing an increase in January 2023 because they're aware of how difficult this has been having these back-to-back large increases, but that's not a guarantee. They are looking at it. So we're going to be hopeful, and we're definitely going to be putting our voices in with any of our mailing associations and with the Postal Service for asking them to hold back on that because these have been very, very devastating increases. And quite honestly, the Postal Service financially is doing pretty well. So they really don't need to do that. But they're trying to aggressively meet their 10-year plan. So they're trying to do that on a very assertive basis, and that's why you're seeing these back-to-back increases. So, but the bad news is, yes, there will be at least a July increase in 2023, if not both in January and July. I wish I could give you better news, but so if you have any mailing industry or other industry associations that you belong to, make sure that you ask them to advocate for the Postmaster General to not implement that January increase. Okay, can you restate the overview of proposed changes to periodicals for a nonprofit? That's a good point. We didn't put in a chart for nonprofit. It's essentially a discount off the regular rates, but we can reach out to you on an individual basis and get that information for you. We'll be happy to do that. But and for future webinars, we'll keep that in mind that we need to put that chart in there as well. Thank you for bringing that up. Okay, periodicals. If advertising and editorial rates are essentially the same for zones 1 through 9, why have zones? Well, I think you've hit on one of the things that the Postal Service is trying to move towards. I think they're trying to eliminate some of the zoning, not only in periodicals, but in bound printed matter as well. And that's going to be a gradual change, but I think that that's the direction that they're going. And I think this is just one of those means to do that, is to try to start reducing those gaps and lowering the differences between the zones and the difference between advertising and editorial. It would certainly make calculations easier. Okay. Another question, are there any resources at LSC to help optimize our titles when it comes to these new rules or new prices? Well, Chris, you want to handle that one?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Yeah, we absolutely have staff on hand that can help with that. We would need to understand your titles and would need to see a postal statement. But from those two things, we could certainly come back with recommendations.
Absolutely.
And if you're not co-mailing today, that will absolutely be the first one, is to explore what it takes to get into co-mail.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Chris.
Mhm.
Okay, this is more of
Sorry, we have two hands
a,
raised. So
sure.
Okay.
Franklin, I'm going to unmute you.
Monica, how are you?
Hi, Frank. How are you?
Very well. I just had a couple comments. The first was related to your bound printed matter parcels for the lower zones.
Mhm.
They increased significantly, and I think the post office is realizing they're trying to push this connect service. So that, I'm sure, is driving some of those ridiculous increases for lower zones.
I think
And
you're right.
the second point is that fuel surcharges are eviscerating any drop shipping discounts, and that if you're going to do a pure drop shipment, be very careful and work with your vendor, especially if you're periodicals, because the motivation to do so might not be financial, might be just service related, and you're
Yes.
doing so at your own peril. And the last statement is we don't have software yet to really finally define these special palette makeups for saturate, high density and high density plus.
Mhm.
So we're pretty much going to have to guess and give a professional opinion until probably, I guess, June, I would suspect, until the major providers release software that allow you to pinpoint that. But that's a great presentation, and as always, you educate me, Monica.
Thank you, Frank. Frank and I go back many, many years. Thanks, Frank. Yeah, you bring up great points, Frank. And we have made that known to the Postal Service about the fuel surcharge, that they do need to start looking at the way that they discount those things and across different classes, not just periodicals, but anything that drop ships, because it's really hard to keep up right now with the increasing prices of fuel, and that has a major impact on the economics of doing your drop ship. But you also have to keep the service in mind, which is what Frank brought up. So there's delivery impacts to doing drop shipping as well, and you don't want to forget about those. So you need to kind of balance those two. But the Postal Service is well aware. We've made them aware, and we'll continue to make them aware of just how devastating those fuel surcharges are, and that they need to account for that when they're putting those discounts together for drop shipping. Okay, let's see. Periodical and marketing mail are offering less discount to mail than in the past. Do you sense that the Postal Service is trying to eliminate these altogether? I think what they're trying to do is move more towards shape-based categories rather than classes that are based on content. And again, I think that'll be a gradual movement, but I think that's what they're trying to do, because really to them, a letter is a letter. It doesn't really matter what's in it. And a magazine or a catalog is a flat. It's a flat as a flat. They're going to process them all the same. Doesn't matter whether it's a magazine that has editorial content in it or it's a periodical. Now there is some differences in the service standards for the different classes of mail, so I think that's also rolled into that equation. But I do think they are going to be moving more towards shape-based rather than content-based. These are great questions, by the way. Okay, here's another one on periodical. I think we'll reach out to this person individually and speak with them about their periodicals. Okay, what is the biggest factor influencing where on the spectrum of price increases a periodical will fall. Is it primarily advertising versus editorial percentage? That's a great question. I don't think we've done enough analysis yet to get a trend there. I think as time goes on and we look at more and more of the periodicals analysis, we'll start to see some trends there, so we can make some draw some conclusions from that. But right now, I just think it's too early. We haven't done enough analysis to see exactly where that's going to fall. And here's a question about co-binding. What's required to co-bind? We'll probably reach out to that person individually as well. That's very, very provider specific. So LSC would have our co-bind requirements. Other providers will have their own. So we'll reach out to that person individually.
Monica, the next person, Heidi, has
Okay.
her hand raised.
All right.
I'm gonna go ahead, Heidi.
Hello, thank you. Thanks, Monica, Chris. I was hoping maybe your example didn't include the pre-fund. Is the pre-fund in or out?
It is in at a slightly lower rate, or a percentage, I should say. And it's because this was still in play. In other words, the legislation wasn't signed when this was filed. So it is in at a slightly lower amount. But hopefully for future rate cases, that will not be there at all.
Okay, so you're saying that just because of the timing, it needs to be included.
Right.
Yeah, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Good question. All right. Okay, it looks like that written question was the same. Let's see. Is co-mail a viable option for a weekly periodical? That's a great question. I think that's a bit of a challenge. I don't think we would, walk away from that discussion, but maybe Chris, you can chime in a little bit more. I think we have to look at everything now, but it would be a little bit of a challenge.
We do. I mean, we have weeklies now that co-mail, but their schedule has been adjusted to support that. So if you've got some flexibility, I think it could work, but that's probably more of a one-on-one discussion.
Yep. Thank you. What is the difference between high density and saturation? Another good question. And of course, you're going to stump me here because I don't remember the exact percentage, but there has to be a certain percent of the delivery points on a carrier's route to hit high density versus saturation. And I forget.
90%. 90% saturation, 125 copies for high density to the carrier's route.
All right, great. Thank you, Chris. All right, is there a plan to increase the size of the co-mail pools to get better levels for meeting qualifications for discounts? And again, I think that's going to be provider specific, but and Chris, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we have capacity, right? We
do, and we've added pockets to support, these additional postal pre-sort discounts. So it is a constant evolution. As the rates change, all of the providers seek ways to achieve that rate, and we do as well.
Thank you. All right, what exactly distinguishes a 3- or 5-digit category mailing, and what would need to change to move it up to a high density category? It's pretty much the density of your list. So in the pre-sort process, you're going to gather everything together by zip code, and if you have sufficient volumes to meet the pre-sort requirements, that'll dictate how many you'll have at a 3-digit versus a 5-digit. In order to be able to get to carrier out and high density, you have to have sufficient quantities to a carrier's route. So if you don't have that density in your own mailing, the best way to do that is with some kind of cooperative type of effort, like co-mailing, co-binding, to merge with other mailings to get to that density. Anything to add there, Chris?
No, good explanation.
I want to be mindful of the time here too. I don't want to miss any questions though. All right, another person indicating they'd be interested in nonprofit periodical prices, so we'll reach out to you. Again, thank you for that request. And this also has to do with periodicals. Well, under what circumstances would a periodical save money by pre-sorting? Actually, you would save money by pre-sorting anytime, but if you can do it in a cooperative manner where you're combining your magazine with other magazines, or like in the case of LSC, we have mixed class, so we combine both marketing mail and periodicals in the same co-mail pool, you get even more opportunity. So again, that might be a better as a one-off, one-on-one conversation for that one, but typically speaking, anytime you can pre-sort to any level will be beneficial, but the more that you can merge your mail with other mail and get to a higher level of pre-sort, the better off you are. It also helps with delivery. Well, this is kind of a I guess philosophical question, but for periodicals, if the Postal Service is indeed trying to minimize the price difference between advertising and editorial, then is it not true that they are eliminating the traditional subsidization of the free flow of information? Yes, you can look at it that way. If they're going to true shape-based categories and prices, that would be an indicator that would be the case, yes. Any reason to think that they will be eliminated completely, periodicals? I don't think so. I don't see that happening, simply because I think some of the delivery standards are a little bit different, and I think the Postal Service is very cognizant of that, and that's why they're going through this migration to shape-based very, very slowly and very carefully, because they understand that even though, you know, a flat is a flat, there's still delivery standard differences, and people are expecting different types of delivery standards depending on what's in their mailing. So I would say no, they're probably not going to eliminate it, but you may see a very, very different picture of what periodicals looks like in the future. That's kind of my personal opinion. Okay, another person wanting nonprofit. Okay. And
Monica, one more
yes.
hand from Madrid Trambo. I'm gonna unmute you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Madrid. Okay, we'll come back to Madrid. Okay.
All right. Yeah, sometimes you can click that by accident thinking that's the way to submit your question. So I've had that happen before. Let's see, we co-mail nonprofit flat. Can we request an analysis of our estimated increase from LSC? Yes, you can, and we'll give you more information about that in just another minute as we wrap up. But you can, if you're an LSC client, we are happy to do that analysis for you. And what's the difference between high density and high density plus? I don't know, do you have those percentages, Chris?
So high density is 125. High density plus, I believe, is 350. So that's the quantity per carrier's route.
Carrier's route, okay.
So your carrier would have to have obviously not one bundle of 125, but a of bundles in walk sequence amounting to 125 copies for high density.
Okay. I'm learning something here. Okay, looks like that might be the last question.
Yeah, because we've got 1 minute left, so that worked out
All
well.
right. Okay, well, we don't want to cut people off, but
Mhm.
all right, so as we wrap up here, and again, thank you for all those questions, great questions. If you are an LSC client, we are very happy to do those analysis for you. You can contact either your LSC Communications account manager at the printing plant or your sales representative, and we'll be happy to get those in the works for you. Just keep in mind that we get a lot of requests for those, so there'll be a little bit of a queue as we work through those, but we're happy to do that. If you have any questions about this material, you can contact me. There's my email there, or the Postal Operations team. There's also an email there. And we will be posting the recording for this webinar to our LSC Postal blog, and there's a QR code that you can scan to get there, but we'll get, once that recording is converted, we will be posting that to our LSC blog under the resources area, so you'll be able to access this recording. And don't forget that you can also take advantage of getting the handouts. You can download those either from the GoToWebinar console here. There's a line that says handouts. You can click on that and download it from there. Or if you do run into problems, just send us an email either to me or to Postal Operations, and we'll be happy to help you. And don't forget also to fill out the survey. Once you receive your follow-up email, we appreciate any feedback that you can provide. Again, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Megan. And thanks for joining us today. I hope this was beneficial and that you enjoyed it. And let us know if you have any questions. Thanks again, everybody.
Thanks,
Take care.
everyone.
Bye-bye.